Hello, Eyeo. I'm Giorgia. This is my second time here, and I am very excited. I'm actually even more excited than last year. That was my first. But before I get into the very topic I'm going to talk about, which is kind of personal, let me just introduce who I am and what I do. I am an architect as a background, but I work as an information designer, so building information and knowledge rather than houses. And I work at Accurate, which is an information design agency that I co-founded 3 years ago in Italy. I'm Italian. And we do static and interactive data visualizations, actually working with very different kind of clients, from public institutions, cultural institutions, foundation, but also financial organization, or health and media like online and printed newspapers and magazines. And in the company, we have different backgrounds and skill sets. We are mainly designers, but in our team, we also have sociologists, data analysts, and developers. And we are around 15 people right now, as you can see from the names of the guys in the office. And we have an office in Milan and one in New York that we opened recently, actually after the last Eyeo, so it's pretty new. And I am in the New York office. I'm pretty lucky. Working a lot with our Italian one, having Skype calls early in the morning to maximize the overlap in time and getting used to that. I actually think I'm not really living in New York, but more in the middle of the Atlantic, as for my time zone. And so last year at Eyeo, I've been covering some data visualization projects that we did, and I talked on them, focusing on the importance for designers to get visually inspired from various fields, from my point of view. And so suggesting not to look only to existing data visualizations as a source for inspiration for your projects, but instead to try to get inspired about whatever we aesthetically like. In my case, such as abstract art, but also the repetitive aesthetics of music notations, for example, or even the layering system of architectural drawings, or the shapes and the aesthetics of objects and natural elements that we find in our daily experience and that we like. And this to really understand what is that we like of what we see, and what are the aesthetic qualities of these pleasant images that we choose. And I concluded on how I feel that drawing and redrawing these images we like definitely helps to introduce what I would call a level of abstraction, to catch, to capture, and make yours the things that you're attracted from. And then to translate these features as core principle and guidelines in building visual composition with data. And this year, I decided to start from where I finished last year, but going really in depth on that. And you have to know, talking at Eyeo for the second time, it's hard. You can talk conferences, but Eyeo is Eyeo. It's kind of like struggling with the second album as a musician. The first one is easier, isn't it? Just saying. But anyway, I decided to talk about a personal topic, which is my aesthetic research for data visualization, which is something that I really take a great pleasure from, and which I figured out 100% dealing with this obsession that I have for daily looking at tons of images, abstracting what I like of them, redrawing these features to make them mine, and then replicated this sort of digested beauty in composition with data. And I really understood that this is 360 degrees influences my approach to data visualization. And I just want to really share the 100% of what moves me in that. And well, should I have talked about drawing and shape a PowerPoint slideshow? So I also had a lot of fun in drawing all of my presentation, almost all of it, as you've already started seeing. And so basically, this talk is all about how to make an obsession becoming functional and to convince everybody that actually it is like that. But just to get it straight, I'm not good at drawing, and neither really I want to become. This is absolutely not about beautiful drawings, and you will see it especially in the end of the presentation. But linking all of this to the field of data visualization, at Accurate, when we do data visualization, we really try to never start from visual standards to visualize data. We never start by listing the possibilities that we have, like bar charts, scatter plots, or by seeing what the tools that we use can really create easily. We like this idea to create very customized pieces every time, exploring how this analytical representation can be beautiful and pleasant. Of course, keeping the accuracy and the data of the data analysis intact and clear. And we do that because we really think that in certain cases, the aesthetic aspect of a data visualization can be considered as important as the data itself in helping readers to get interested about a topic and in triggering their curiosity to explore more. And we also think that aesthetic features can definitely be considered not only as an ornamental attributes within a data-driven visual story, and also the right kind of ornament isn't necessarily a bad thing. And also why a reader shouldn't be able to find the data visualization both intellectually compelling and so rigorous data-wise, but also emotionally rich. And at Accurate, I am responsible for the design direction, and I am most of the time supposed to come up with design ideas for data visualization projects. It actually happens pretty often since we have multiple projects going on at a time, and I just developed my own method for doing that. And I every day spend a great amount of time looking at visual inspiration and carefully and maniacally organizing those different kind of images on Pinterest, which is my tool for doing that. And I really love doing that. It's kind of like a compulsive pleasure. And yeah, at the moment, I can also do it more frequently since I'm spending a lot of time working on Skype with the Milan office. And I would definitely use also this time, of course, listening, I swear it, but also either pinning or redrawing images. So summing up, what I find myself doing a lot of time, even when I don't have a specific data visualization project in mind, is getting lost in images that I like, tracking those images down, and redrawing them compulsively. And why drawing? Well, there are lots of incredibly interesting books on the act and the practice of drawing, and I think that most of you already know the theory. And most of you know how drawing plays an important role in the genesis of new idea. And it's been largely described as a functional tool to get ideas, to capture this idea, and to communicate them. This is my starting point. I'm not going to focus on that. But besides, also the act of drawing and the very fact that you choose to stop and draw, in a way, is just a way to focus attention, just by itself. But also, why talking about drawing here? Because for me, it is a real obsession. I just feel that I freak out if I don't have my pens and papers with me. I feel that I miss a part of understanding the situations. And people make fun of that, because in every situation, I would first things pull out my pencil case and paper. And these are just a few out of the many pictures that my boyfriend took of me during last years in different situations. You can also see how I cut my hair lately. And there is also beard close to my drawings pretty often. Actually, now that I see them. That's okay. And again, I don't have any former artistic background. I've never taken a drawing class, ever. It's just that sketching notes, so the actual visual, the act of tracing visual thought on paper, for me really means primarily understanding what I'm thinking. And so, how many of you actually take notes or visual notes to understand the situation, a conversation? Well, yeah, that's okay. How many of you are sketching right now? Not so many. And how many instead really fear the empty canvas and the pencil and thinks, I'm not good at it, why I should do that? You're not being honest here. It seems like you're a few. Anyway, let's see if sharing my practice can be helpful or at least inspiring, even for those of you that are super skeptical right now. Give me a chance. I'm starting, finally. So I've been always very fascinated by musical scores, that elegant and minimal form of repetitiveness, by the symbolism of this language, which, if you think about it, it's already information design, the idea of a temporal score conveying all of the information about how a piece should be performing. It's really intriguing to me. And in this project, in this data visualization that we published on the May issue of Popular Science, we analyzed and visualized the top scientific papers and their peaks of citations over 20 years for 20 scientific disciplines. And the point of the visualization was to figure out how long does it take for papers to become famous, to be cited more, and thus to become relevant for the scientific community. And as you might see, we really took inspiration from the musical score panorama, as for the singular elements that I'm going to explain in a bit. But we also mix it with this idea of trees and branches referring to the scientific world in a way, which is actually the topic and the very context of the data themselves. So we built this sort of circular scores for each of the selected discipline with a circular time span from 1948 to 1998, and we highlighted the top 20 paper per discipline, so the paper that got more quoted over time, and we represented them as musical notes positioned on the circle according to the year the paper was published. And you will see in a little bit how here drawing really served for me as a tool to combine what I was trying to get inspired from, the data that we had, and the more vague ideas that I had about the scientific panorama. And just to explain it a little bit more, the length of each note, so the length of each paper, represents the number of years it took that paper to reach the maximum number of citations, along another temporal dimension, which is the radius. Besides, for each paper, we added extra information on the total number of references, which is the small colored bar at the center, the number of authors per each paper, which sometimes are surprisingly really many, and that are the dots above the note, and eventual recurrent authors, which is the arc that you see connecting the dot, if there are any recurrent authors. And we also added these colored backgrounds to represent the running average time to become famous through time for each disciplines, which was done by analyzing the total of the paper published and quoted over time, and so not only the 20 that we represented. It is a quite rich narrative, I know, and also the data analysis we performed was quite complex and articulated, but you can definitely get lost in exploring those musical disciplines, I hope beautiful musical disciplines, and noticing some patterns and interesting facts, which I'm not gonna bother you with today. But it all started from this very, very ugly and empty sketch that served primarily as a way for me to give a macro structure in my mind to the information that we were dealing with, highlighting how I imagine them being in branches, in trees, in this kind of way, without really getting any depth in any kind of data. And you also will see a lot of question marks in my sketches because I never really know if we can do exactly what I imagine to do. But I think this is interesting because it also happened quite often that the act of exploring visual shapes, drawing them, raises questions. Like in this case, where I was, I think, wondering, drawing if we could look for recurrent authors as example. Because honestly, I felt that it would be nice to have some visual connection like arcs between these notes. I know it kind of seemed kind of unorthodox process, but is it how it works sometimes for us? I'm trying to be honest here. And then, when we already had our test on the data, and by we I mean them, the guys in the office, not really me, well, drawing can also serve as a sort of refining tool, at least for me. Before even getting digital, before opening Illustrator, I need to have a drawing that visually can sum up all of the choices that we've made. Only in this way I can feel okay about the project. In this other visualization, we try to explore the 100 geniuses of language in human history as identified by the author Harold Bloom in the book called The Genius. And we've been very inspired from the book itself and by how we conceptually organize the chapters of the book following the Kabbalah Sephiroth, which you can see a preview right here. So it basically features 10 authors in each chapter, mirroring the Kabbalah structures and the names of the Sephiroths. And so arranging the 100 authors in the book in this way. And as for the visualization, we try to faithfully represent our geniuses as the author probably imagined them in his mind without having the possibility to do it visually. But you know, this Kabbalah thing is not really, really beautiful and visually compelling per se, at least not for me. Thus, I just abstracted the special organization of it and tried to find a ways to make it hopefully more elegant using the data at hand, which were the author's information on their birth period, which is the length of the arc, the profession, which is the type of the line, the continent they came from, which is the color of the little square, if they are men or women, but also the number of pages that Bloom dedicated to each author, which is a dimension of the yellow circle. And then we had this comparison on the number of page visits for the Wikipedia page of the author, which is the blue one on top, so seeing if Bloom was right about the people's preferences. And here I think I was obsessively trying to understand which visual shapes could help in making this Kabbalah thing less ugly according to the data that we had. These are randomly visual drawing and exploration on that. And then here I think I was almost there. Maybe the guys in the office told me a little bit more on their data collection. And I remember that I thought of these authors as a sort of flowers growing up with different lengths of their stem depending on their birth period. So this was my image in mind. And finally, we got this data visualization. And I'd say that here drawing, for me, was really the tool to visually understand, because I had a structure already in mind, which was the Kabbalah organization, but there was something I didn't like about this structure, and I needed to draw, and redraw to test what actually looked beautiful and worked for the data. Oh, and I have a funny story on that. This is actually the favorite piece of my grandmother, and she does have the visualization printed and hanged on the wall of her living room. I don't really think that she got neither the topic nor the exoteric reference to Kabbalah, but she liked it because these aesthetics reminded her to candle holders, as she called them. And I love how sometimes people named our abstract visualization referring to something different, to something that clicked with their mind, visually speaking, and actually referring most of the times to visual panoramas that are not what we as designers looked at to be inspired. And elaborating on this hidden visual inspiration, sometimes we can also be very literal and try to make the visual inspiration that we had clear, especially when it comes to visual languages that are already codified, conventional in a way. And languages that have their aesthetic rules or features that everybody can recognize, such as abstract art, of course. And I showed last year, here at Eyeo, how a visit to the MoMA's Inventing Abstraction exhibition in New York was 100% functional to represent some data set we were working on at the moment. And I'm gonna showing this again quickly, but this time talking about how the visual ideas drove the data analysis in a positive way, actually. So at that moment, when I was visiting the museum, we were working on many overlapping data sets on the phenomenon of the brain drain, meaning the researchers that decided to leave for another country. And we had a lot of parameters that we wanted to compare for 16 countries, such as how many researchers go abroad from the country, how many enter the country, how many are coming back after a period abroad, where do they mainly go. But also we were having a lot of economic and social indicators about the country, such as the unemployment rate, the female employment rate, the percentage of foreigners and immigrants in regular population, just to give a little bit of a context for this phenomenon. So many parameters. And while I was at the museum, I was really struck by the beauty of these kind of compound elements made by very regular shapes and primary colors, such as in the painting of Malevich, Kandinsky, and Mondrian. And I spent the whole visit really redrawing before the painting. It took a while, and my sketchbooks were running out of paper, but I found so compelling to try to make this beautiful abstract composition a little more mine. And immediately, each of the countries we were analyzing started to appear in my mind as a compound element whose parameter could be visually determined by the positioning, the rotation, and the spatial coloration of those geometrical shapes that I was representing. And yeah, these are the sketches that was preparatory for the piece. Then, following this visual idea, we decided to normalize all of the indicators that we had, so all of the data that I was talking about before, so that they could be compared between each other as trends and not as singular values, to give the general situation of the country and to compose these sort of very abstract elements. Here, we were starting to explore it digitally, and here drawing became digital drawing before applying the real data, trying to keep the colors as Mondrian would have liked them to be. And there you go. So those simple abstract shapes found their natural path within the visual and for the data, and for the comparison that we wanted to highlight. And they actually perfectly work for recognizing some interesting and unexpected facts on the migration phenomena. It happened quite the same, but within the phase of definition of a more, I say, high-level structure of composition for another visualization that we did. So this one displays the development of the character of Commissario Montalbano. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Throughout all of the 19 novels that Andrea Camilleri, which is the writer, wrote on him. It's an Italian author of detective novels, actually. Just to give you a basic idea, each novel is displayed as a vertical line that starts and ends with the initial and final sentence of the book. And they are horizontally ordered chronologically from the first one to the last one, so representing the evolution of the character. And also here, everything started from the drawing and the kind of research in the data that we did. It started from some visual exploration I was doing to try to understand how to use very simple and basic elements to enable comparisons between the books, so very simple sizes variation and bar charts, but using the composition of them to recreate a more elaborated sort of temporal score for the policeman. And yeah, it happens pretty often in the very early stages of the projects that I would just organize and arrange elements in the paper freely, even randomly, and then I understand which kind of parameters we could look for. Such as in this case, I would draw the books one after the other, and as I draw them, I realize it would be nice to have different lengths of this line. So how about to use the book's actual length as a parameter? Which is kind of like straightforward, but it happened that I got it just because I was drawing these different vertical lines. Or basically that this vertical articulation could allow me to draw horizontal and transversal line to visualize different datasets about the detective, very comparable horizontally. And so we did that, and we used these vertical lines to arrange all of the parameters. And we would have the main character's frequency within the book through the dimension of the circles. And also we included special characters as murders, victims, and eventual missing people. But you don't worry, you can still enjoy reading the books because we didn't reveal their names. And also, since the detective is indeed a very routine-bound person, we also visualize some funny recurrent habits in the middle, like how many times he swims, walks, smokes, sings softly, and eats. And I also remember that in the first sketches, I thought how nice it would be to have something below in the bottom part of the visualization that evolves more fluidly, just because visually to me it makes sense to have this something that evolves more fluidly in the bottom. And then we understood that maybe we could look for the emotions evolutions of the character getting older, emotions that are by definition not so an exact value. And that was why we looked for emotions in the text. And so playing freely with aesthetics can help suggesting us which kind of data it would be interesting to represent. So narrative models can start from visual explorations, I think. Why not? In talking about data and sketching with and without data, I've been asked an interesting question by Moritz Stefaner. We miss you, Moritz, here this year. During a funny data story podcast that we recorded in New York earlier this year. And he basically asked me, okay, Giorgia, but how about the real data? Because you sketch possibilities, but when do the actual data come to the table since you guys are doing data visualization? And I'd sum up by saying that to me and to us, there are about 3 phases that we can describe as a first phase when I am interested in the main, say, macro categories of the data, just like the kind of topics that we are talking about, the eventual correlation, the number of elements that we have, just to see if they are 50 or they are 500. Say, understanding the macro categories to start sketching some visual possibilities about the architecture of the visualization, as I would call that. And here I never really use the actual values in number to set up in the first ideas for the visual models, as you saw in the previous example. This is definitely the phase when visual ideas can drive the choice of the actual parameters to represent for us. Then we would often have a second phase when we would just like focus on the singular element, so the entry points that we have, to figure out which shapes or colors or features we might invent to better represent them according to the type of variables that we have. And again, yeah, by we I mean them. People in the office also makes fun of me because I try to never open an Excel file, and I'd better have them explaining me which categories we have, which is the highest number and the smallest one. But this is another story. And to conclude, we would generally have a final phase when we would structure what I expect of finally having in Illustrator, but in paper. And here I think is when you're pretty sure that we can go ahead with the visual model that we have in mind. And I think every time I would love to refine the sketch before even getting digital, to have everything in the same place, also very shareable with clients for quick feedbacks. And well, this is not another phase, but it's maybe the most common use that everybody can see in drawing after you get a refined one. Well, you're seeing here the visualization that the drawings were for. So I think that if you're able to structure a drawing that, again, is not beautiful, who cares, but a drawing that gives people you're working with and you're working for a clear and quick idea of what you have in mind, well, this can be really an interesting way of saving time. The only downside of that is that sometimes you might find clients that simply fall in love with the sketch and would ask you, oh, but would it look like that even in the final version, right? Well, not really. but sometimes you can take it as a nice suggestion. Like we try to do here. This is a project that is a side ongoing collaboration with two friends of ours, Mafe De Bagis and Filippo Pretolani. And it happened that while I was sketching visuals for the user experience for this mobile application, we simply really fell in love with the idea of having a hand-drawn feeling for the final design, especially given the very topic of it, which is linking emotions and places. It's called Pleens, and it's a mobile application with the aim of understanding if and how a more human and warm design for a check-in based mobile application can foster people to share more meaningful content regarding their attachment to places, showing what they feel in places and why in the form of short stories and messages. And well, it's full of geolocalization-based applications out there. We, of course, know them, and some of them are really great. It's just that maybe, and this was our guess at the beginning, for how they are designed and for the kind of user experience that they offer, well, maybe they're not 100% capable to capture and report the very qualitative emotion that we charge places we like with. In fact, as feelings are not quantifiable and they never deal with numbers and sequential operations, we tried to build and to design a very emotional interface with the idea to test if this beauty or emotionality of the interface and the aesthetic gesture and interaction with the application could by themselves enhance and foster the willing to actually use it. And what you're seeing here are my first visual explorations, and as always, it was the act of drawing these small hearts, aggregating them by time or in the space of the application, that made me think about possible functionalities. And I know I'm getting mellow here, but follow me anyway. After I explored the possibilities for the overall visual experience, we paired up with a friend of mine. She is an illustrator we usually collaborate with, and she has a very particular technique and style. And she helped us recreating these feelings as that I was sketching down, but doing it digitally, working with textures and strokes. But how does it work? This is actually a short video of the alpha version of Pleens. So when you open the application, a white paper environment with a pulsing little red heart ready to be thrown out in space welcomes you. You simply throw the heart with the gesture of throwing, and it falls in on the map, recognizing when you are, or you can move the map if you think you've got it wrong. You can choose which kind of emotion it is by changing the heart. We have many of them, but they come with no official description, so you just pick the one that feels right for the moment. You can dedicate it to the person you're thinking of in that place, or you can add your own message. You can decide also where to share it. Is it public? Is it just for the two of you? Or maybe just for you to remember the place? And of course, after you share it, you will have your explorable Pleens on the map, reminding you the places you were feeling your emotions and maybe confirming which parts of the places in the city you really like. And I hope that it's clear why we try to keep this hand-drawn style here, also for the actual application. Well, this project, Pleens, still misses the real social part. This one that you've seen is a test version, and it still has limited functionalities. It's on the Apple Store for free if you want to play with it. It's only for the iPhone right now. But we are planning to finally put our hands and heads on it and developing it further this year because we got some funding, so it's easier to focus on it. Okay, but as much as drawing while designing and for designing for me is fundamental, I find it also useful and extremely rewarding, the very act of drawing, to explore shapes and compositions with no purpose, but just for the pleasure that I have in drawing. I call it drawing per se, random drawing, when, of course, I don't have any kind of data visualization project in mind, but as much as I feel that it's just a hobby for me, I think it also ends up being very functional to my design. I find myself pretty often doing this kind of random drawings that you're seeing now. I really like it very much. And about them is not the result that I like. That's not the point. They are not particularly meaningful as pieces. It's the idea of looking at things and tracing them down, adding what my mind sees in them, actually. Or also tracing down what I feel about something I'm listening to at the moment, just doing it visually. And another point that came to mind while I was trying to understand how this works for me, so that I'd be able to tell something here on the stage, is that I found that when I'm sketching the thing that happens to attract my curiosity, I always try to interpret both the single visual elements and the overall composition of the thing that I'm looking at the same time. Like the overall spatial structure of what I'm in front of and the small tiny details of the shapes of the elements in it, simply mixing them down in a new spatial organization. And it just fascinates me how we look at the world, how we recognize things based on what we visually experienced before, but we also mix them with what we have in mind at the very moment, and projecting everything into something new when drawing something down. And this kind of experiments can be done manually, but also digitally. I do it both, even if I still find papers and pen more rewarding, like physically rewarding. And all of these things on random abstract drawing, it produces already plenty of visual materials related to the field I'm working in that I already made mine, that I already digested and thought about, kind of like pieces ready to be used as a very close and personal source of inspiration. As an example, this is absolutely nothing. It was a total digital drawing that I did while I was doing, I don't remember what. I just liked the overall of these triangles with small eyes and some circular friends around. I put it in my repository, and that's it for the moment. But we are lately reusing those explorations for a visual art auction piece that we're working on at the moment, like right now. So this is a total work in progress. And so here we are analyzing the data for the 500 species that have been sold at the highest price, and a lot of interesting information on them. And this image that you see is completely with fake data because we are in the stage where still no real data are there. They're just the macro dimensions. But can you spot some already digested elements here? And actually, they are fitting particularly well with the data that we are analyzing. Also, the rotation of the triangles is an interesting feature to assign to certain parameters we found on the difference, as an example, between the estimate selling price for the pieces and the actual selling price. But you'll see the final piece later this month. OK, I'm almost done. Just the final thing. You've seen always abstract shapes in my drawings, which I love. I only have one very subject for which I become figurative, and it's a further obsession. I wasn't really sure to share it, but let's do it. So I have a pretty big collection of ugly, ugly portraits of my boyfriend, which happens also to be one of my partners at Accurate, and which is also here in this room. But why? Well, simply most of the time that we are together while we are not working, like having a beer at a pub or dinner at a restaurant, which actually happens pretty often because I don't really like to cook. Well, I would simply draw him while we talk, without thinking, while I talk either. I just can't help but doing it. And yes, they are ugly, because honestly, I am terrible at portraits. I'm terrible at representing the actual reality. Sometimes he doesn't even have his eyes, sometimes he misses some other physical features. And he doesn't really look like in this drawing. I think you wouldn't recognize him around just by looking at these images. But why I show that here? Well, first of all, because as I said, I'm trying to be as complete as possible with my whole thing with drawing, but also because honestly, nobody can say that these are beautiful drawings. But the fact that we can find a subject that we like and regularly start to depict it, I think it makes already a satisfying collection of drawings to keep, doesn't it? And I think it also could be a starting point to begin with for everybody. Yeah, and also he thinks that I'm not that good with portraits, actually. That was nice of him, though. Anyway. I think I'm up for drawing some conclusions. Apart from the last parenthesis, I wanted to shape up this personal talk on this very analogic topic because we everybody work with data, with information, quantities, and variables. We everybody work digitally the 90% of the time, and thanks God that we can do it. And specifically in my work, which is data visualization, I think a very common approach is to start from what the tools that we use, being D3, processing, Tableau, from what the tools that we use can produce, and maybe also from what we feel more comfortable in doing with these tools, unless you're a genius coder that doesn't see the code anymore, but just the final output, but this is not my case. But generally speaking, you don't want to focus on that, I think. And the fact that when I am designing a data visualization and when I am sketching what comes to mind, the fact that I can't have the data in the pen and on the paper is very helpful to explore visual features and visual aggregation that start exactly from what you have in mind and that can serve to open questions on the data itself. I just see it as a shortcut from your head to the final piece. Of course, this is not so linear as I described, and obviously you would need to have an execution and programming part after that, because in real life, not all of the clients, unfortunately, are okay on just buying the sketches. But what I wanted to point out with it is really the approach to the whole process. I love this sentence that I find, I don't remember when in some books, drawing as a tactile feedback for your mind. I think it gives the idea of what I was trying to say throughout all of the talk. Which is also what I realized that drawing simply does to my mind. In a way, it really gives shapes to my inner thoughts and help me see and understand on the page. I'm not usually, as a human being, able to perfectly get and define what I'm thinking or what pops up in my mind about a design project, a data visualization project. I usually say that I cannot think about a project without a pen and some paper. And I can't, actually, I swear. And I'm so jealous of the people that can talk projects while walking, for example. To me, it's different. The only way I can evaluate my ideas or intuitions is by seeing them come into life in paper. I know that drawing is my way to understand that I have an idea in the first place. And this is why I do it without any kind of prejudice, just like letting my hand freely go, and really without asking me if it's the right shape to draw for the moment for this data visualization project. I then look at what I've drawn and I can decide whether to work on it, trying to engage this loop between thoughts, paper, and sight. And so I just encourage you to do the same, like trying to approach drawing less scientifically and more naively. So drawing is useful to show an idea you already have defined, but it's incredibly more powerful to help this idea take shape. I don't really know how this can be integrated in the process of other designers or artists. I believe that each one, of course, has to find his own way to deal with his own creativity. I just know that it works perfectly for me. It's the only way I can do my job, and it's my own way of thinking. And it was incredibly helpful also for me to stop and realize it and elaborate on it while preparing this talk. And I also encourage any of you also sometimes to stop and get a detour of your mind and obsession like I did, because it's really helpful. And coming back to data visualization, I think that it's valuable to embrace this indeterminism, these open possibilities that arise from free visual explorations without boundaries. It's valuable to accept that we can also get lost to find the best way to get where we are supposed to go. End of the presentation. Thank you.